Hey, welcome back to MetFlex and Chill. This is your host, Rachel Gregory, and today is a solo Q&A episode. All right, before we jump into the questions today, I just want to give a shout out to my weekly newsletter, the Friday Flex. If you're not signed up for the Friday Flex yet, you should be. Lots of fun stuff gets sent out in that every Friday. I promise I won't spam you. I'm just sharing things that I think will be beneficial for you, that will help you along your nutrition and fitness journey, things that have helped me, and all that jazz. So hopefully you're signed up for it. If not, go to metflexlife.com/newsletter. I will link that in the show notes as well. So you can click that link and just add your name and email and you'll be good to go. All right, let's get into the questions today. All right, first question today. How do you convince clients that extreme deficit and cardio isn't the answer? Okay, so first things first, it's all about educating my clients. So if I'm trying to convince my clients to do something, it all comes down to explaining to them, okay, this is why we're doing what we're doing. It's not just, okay, go do this and, hope for the best. I want my clients to understand why they're doing what they're doing so that when they go off, when we stop coaching together, that they can do this on their own and that they can, not only achieve the results that we get coaching together, but to continue to achieve any other goals that they have down the line, to sustain those goals and, that transformation long term. So it all comes back to the education side of things, right? So with, convincing clients that extreme deficits and extreme cardio are not the answer, I basically want to help them to just see what they've done in the past and talk through, why it wasn't sustainable for them based on where they're at now. So if they, took an extreme approach in the past and they were able to get results, but then they just kind of bounced back. Wow. Tongue twister there. If they just bounce back to where they were before, then yeah, maybe they got the results, but they weren't able to sustain them. So obviously that was not a sustainable approach for them. The thing we have to realize here too, though, is that, sometimes an aggressive deficit and implementing strategic cardio is necessary and is something that some people thrive off of. Some people thrive off of like a short, intense approach to dieting. But I wouldn't say that's the majority of people. The majority of people especially the clients that I work with, will benefit much more from taking a more sustainable, moderate approach, because in that sustainable, moderate approach, they're able to sustain, obviously, and they're able to learn the habits and develop the daily practices that are necessary to be able to achieve their results, but also to maintain those results, like I said, long term. So it really just comes down to, okay, where is this person at? Where are they coming from? Like, what did they try in the past? What worked for them? What didn't work for them? What type of personality do they have, right? Where can we implement their personality, their success in the past and use that to our advantage? So like, for example, for me, I've tried different dieting approaches in the past. And for me, there's been success with some of them and there's not success for others. So I've learned kind of what works for me. And this also will change, based off of where you're at in your life too. So I know that like certain periods of my life, I benefited more from actually taking a little bit more of an aggressive approach because I could go hard for a few weeks and then pull back, go hard for a few weeks and then pull back. That was something that I could adhere to. There's other periods of my life where that didn't work. And taking the slower, I guess you could say slower, more moderate approach worked for me. So there's no really black and white answer here. It's really diving into, okay, where are my clients coming from? What worked for them in the past? What didn't work for them in the past? And how can we put together a periodization plan to help them work towards their goals for where they're at now in their life? And when I say a periodization plan, that is, okay, let's plan out the next 6 to 12 months. It's not just let's plan out the next week or month. Let's plan out the next 6 months. Even if you sign up to work with me for 3 months for one-on-one coaching clients, I require a minimum 3-month commitment. But I'm still going to give you a plan for 6 months. Like, we're going to look at 6 months from now, we're going to look at a year from now, see where you want to be, and then reverse engineer that, right? What events do you have coming up? Do you have, a wedding coming up in a few months? Do you have a wedding coming up next year? Like, how do we reverse engineer so that you're going to get the best results, but do it in a way that is sustainable for you and that will allow you to reach your goal, but do it in a way that is not torture, right? So hopefully that makes sense. But the biggest thing is realizing that with an extreme deficit, that is only going to work if you're doing it in a very short period of time and you're giving yourself diet breaks and maintenance phases between that. So I'm not going to dive into all of that right now, but like I said, for a small percentage of people, at least from my experience, taking an aggressive approach can be beneficial, but you have to do it very, very strategically. You can't just say, hey, I'm going to take this extreme aggressive approach for the next 4 months. No, it's like, all right, we can periodize this. So maybe you go into a pretty aggressive deficit for 2 weeks, then we pull back for a week. Then you go in for another 2 weeks, then we pull back for a week. Or maybe you have a lot of travel coming up and maybe you're traveling every 4th week of the month or something like that. Okay, so if it's going to be easier for you to sustain this deficit while you're home and you're not traveling for 3 weeks and then you have a week away, all right, let's go to maintenance for that week when you're traveling, when you have less control of the food you're eating, you're have less control of, your exercise and all that stuff. So those are the things that we need to dive into. And so there are actually cases where taking a little bit more of an aggressive approach can be beneficial, but you have to supplement that with a less aggressive maintenance phase or diet break period or diet breaks in between, like I mentioned, refeeds, things like that. It all comes back to the strategy and having a plan and a structure, right? So for the other, majority of people, I would say taking a more moderate, sustainable approach or moderate, less aggressive approach is going to be pretty much the answer for a good majority of people, at least from my experience coaching over the last years, right? I've coached and worked with so many different people. And just from that experience and working with all different types of clients, I've found that there's a subset that aggressive approach will work. Wow. I'm talking too fast today. I'm going to slow it down a little bit. So there is a subset of people that will work for, but the majority of people will benefit much more from taking that moderate, more sustainable approach and implementing a deficit that is going to take a little bit of a longer time, but during that time, you're developing the habits, you're developing the skills necessary to be able to sustain your results long term. So with the cardio aspect of things, that was kind of the deficit or the diet aspect of things. And obviously there's so many different routes I can go down with that, but I want to just give you kind of like a little bit of an overlay there. But with the cardio side of things, we have to realize that taking an extreme approach to cardio, especially right from the start of a diet, is probably 99% of the time not a good idea. So we need to realize that, your body adapts to cardio, right? It easily adapts to what you're doing with anything really. Like your body wants to survive. It doesn't care, about looking lean. It doesn't care about having a 6-pack. All it does is care about surviving. So it's going to adapt to whatever you're doing. And that's also one of the reasons why if you are chronically dieting or chronically consuming low calories, your body's going to adapt to that eventually. So there's things that you need to do to make sure that that's not happening to an extreme degree. It is normal for your body to adapt to a deficit. So this is called metabolic adaptation, and that's a normal part of dieting. But if you are dieting chronically on end, you will adapt in a way that is not beneficial, or not beneficial is not the word. Not normal, I guess you could say. So metabolic adaptation is basically your body adapting to a deficit over time. And that's why we need to take breaks. That's why chronic dieting is going to do more harm than good. But if you're taking an extreme approach for a long period of time, you're chronically dieting, you're going to get to this place where your body's actually going to adapt to a certain caloric amount that you're consuming. And it's going to be hard to kind of dig yourself out of that. So we need to, there's a kind of a balance here that we need to find. Like some adaptation is normal, but too much adaptation can get you digging yourself a really deep hole that then you need to come out of, right? So hopefully that made sense. But with the cardio side of things, kind of going back to that, our bodies are really, really, really smart at adapting to cardio. So just to give you a quick example, if you were to go out and run a mile right now, and maybe you haven't run in a long time, and running is just an example because it's an easy one to use, but I actually don't even recommend running as a form of cardio for fat loss. And I'll explain that in a little bit because the next question is actually about another question about cardio. But to kind of get this example across, if you were to go out and run a mile today and your body is just not adapted to that, like you haven't done that in a while, you'll probably burn a good amount of calories, right? You go run that mile again next week, your body is going to burn a little bit less calories. Go run that mile the week after and continue to do this week after week after week. Your body is going to, first of all, you're going to get better at doing it, right? You're going to get more in shape. You're going to get better at actually the skill of running, but your body's in the process of it getting better at that. It's going to become more efficient, right? And so when you become more efficient at something, especially when it comes to cardio, you're going to start burning less calories. So if you're using cardio as a means to burn calories, right, to burn energy for fat loss, you don't want to become efficient at it. If you're, running because you want to train for a marathon or something like that, or a triathlon, yeah, you want to become more efficient at that because you want to be able to do less work and get further, right? That just makes sense for anything, whether it's running or swimming or cycling or any sport that you're doing. You want to become more efficient at it if your goal is to increase your performance and get better. But if you're using cardio as a means to burn calories to help you get a little bit deeper into your deficit, then you don't want to become efficient at it. So we just have to realize that our bodies adapt to cardio very, very easily. And if you're not incorporating it strategically in the context of fat loss, you're actually going to be making it a lot harder for yourself to achieve the results you're looking to get and also sustain those results long term. So cardio can be a great tool for fat loss, but you need to make sure that you're implementing it strategically for what you're doing. So going right into an aggressive, cardio plan right off the bat, right when you start a diet, 100% of the time, I don't recommend that because that is not going to be something that's going to be advantageous for you over the long period of that or over the time of that dieting phase and in the long term. So hopefully that makes sense. But again, I'm going to dive into a little bit more about cardio in the next question. Okay, the next question, steady state or HIIT cardio, which is better for fat loss? Okay, so my opinion, I'm just going to give you my straight answer and then I'll go into why. My opinion on this is going to be steady state or like LISS cardio, low intensity steady state cardio. And here's why. So this is a mistake that I made for so many years, which is why this is my opinion. One of the biggest things that I think people tend to forget about when implementing cardio to lose body fat is the stress response that occurs when you're doing cardio, especially high intensity interval training or high intensity cardio. The stress response that occurs not only doing it, but afterwards as well. So if your goal is to lose body fat and that's your main priority right now, like you're in a fat loss phase, for example, then you're obviously going to be in a deficit, right? You need to be in a caloric deficit to be able to lose body fat. And this is inherently going to mean that you're going to have a lot less recovery resources available or fuel available in general, meaning you have less, nutrients coming in. That means you're going to have less, fuel in your tank, so to speak, to be able to use for recovery, right? Recovery from cardio, recovery from high intensity interval training, Ricardio, that's a new word. Recovery from lifting, from all the other stressors you have going on in your life, right? And your body's stress capacity is already being tapped into when you're in the deficit, right? So being in a caloric deficit itself, like regardless of anything else, is a stress on your body. It's a stress to your system, right? Not having adequate calories coming in to be able to maintain your current body weight, that is a stress. So if you're not taking into account your overall stress load while being in the deficit, and you're doing tons of high intensity cardio, you're going to burn out really quick and you won't be able to recover enough to, one, see good results from that cardio or that high intensity training. And two, you're going to, it's going to lead to a lot of other issues that is just going to make it harder to adhere to the deficit overall and adhere to that fat loss goal overall. It's going to affect your sleep. It's going to affect your appetite, your hormones, all of those things that are necessary to pay attention to when you're trying to lose body fat, because they all play into each other, right? It's not just about, okay, I'm going to go into a deficit and lose body fat. Like, what are all the other things that are occurring in your life right now and your lifestyle to allow you to adhere to that deficit and make it not torture? So we have to realize that being in a calorie deficit in itself is a stress. So we only have so many recovery resources available to adapt and recover from the stressors that are going on in our lives. And if we're adding a bunch of high intensity interval training or high intensity cardio on top of that, usually it just leads to a lot of burnout, like I mentioned, injury. It leads to not being able to sustain what you're doing for a period of time. Like, yeah, maybe you can sustain it for a few days or even a few weeks, but if you're set up, like I mentioned in the previous question, if you're set up to follow a fat loss phase for a few months and you can only sustain what you're doing for a few weeks, like, you're going to burn out before you even get to a place where you start to see results. So that's one thing to think about, right? And, I think, high intensity interval training can be a great form of conditioning to incorporate, but you have to do it in a way that is appropriate and that you're not abusing, right? So again, it comes back to your overall stress load, your recovery ability, and how well you're managing fatigue overall. So if you're already in a deficit and you're stressed out from other things that are going on in your life, right? And you have kids, you have a family to support, you have work, you have stress going on within your job, other things, right? There's so many other stressors that are occurring. So if we're not managing that, if we're not, taking that all into account, and then we're adding, 5 days of CrossFit or Orange Theory on top of that, doing lots of high intensity training, it's going to cause issues. And like I said, this is where I screwed up for many, many years. Dieting and trying to do intense exercise, CrossFit was my what's the word? My choice of torture. And not anything bad about CrossFit, right? But it's just the way that I went about it was not great, especially when I was looking to, change my body composition. I was in a deficit and I was just going hard 6 days a week at CrossFit, doing high intensity training every single day and just not paying attention to my recovery. And eventually I burned out. Eventually my body was like, all right, we're done. Like, I'm not doing this anymore. And I got injured, right? And that forced me to stop because I couldn't, work out through the injury. I mean, I did for the first month or so, I would say. I pushed through the back injury I had, and then eventually came to the point where I was just like, no more. So this is something that we just need to think through, right? Because, it might feel great in the moment with the endorphins going, during that session, that high intensity session. After, you're going to feel like, I got my sweat on, like I'm dead on the floor making a sweat angel. I feel great. I'm talking to myself 3 years ago. But that is not going to last long, right? So we have to really think about kind of the overall goal and how our body is responding from a long-term basis, right? Like, how is your sleep? How's your appetite throughout the day? All of those things. How are you recovering? So another thing is, people argue that, like with high intensity interval training, yes, you can technically burn more calories in a shorter period of time doing, HIIT style training versus LIST or low intensity style or low intensity steady state. Yes, technically you can do that, right, in a shorter amount of time. But the main issue is too much high intensity interval training or cardio is going to, like I said, create a huge amount of stress on your system. And it actually pushes your nervous system into more of that sympathetic flight or fight mode, right? So like I mentioned before, being in a deficit is already a stress on your body. So if you're constantly pushing your body into more of that flight or fight mode, and you're doing this with, constant interval training, things like that, you're going to have a really hard time. And, again, this isn't necessarily a bad thing when you're implementing it properly. But if you're already stressed out from dieting, from life, from crappy sleep, this type of training can really put your kind of overall, I've mentioned this before on this podcast, but your overall stress bucket over the edge. So you're not able to recover optimally. Your ability to recover is going to plummet. Your stress bucket is going to overflow, so to speak. And, on top of that, especially if you're already following a resistance training program and maybe you're not doing like Orange Theory or CrossFit and you're just lifting a few days a week to, build muscle. And we all know why lifting is very important, especially in a fat loss phase, why building muscle and, putting yourself through a strategic lifting program is appropriate, especially in a fat loss phase, to basically send that signal to your body that says, hey, hold on to this muscle so that I don't lose it when I'm in this calorie deficit. But if you're doing that, right, you're already lifting, 3 or 4 days a week, and then you're trying to pile on a ton of high intensity interval training on top of that, it's definitely going to slow your ability to recover from the training stimulus overall, because you're already training, like that lifting is already training in that anaerobic system. So our anaerobic system is more of that, high, fast-paced training. So HIIT training, moderate intensity training, lifting, things like that, versus our aerobic system where we're using oxygen. That's going to be more so the low intensity, steady state training, a little bit of moderate intensity training. But if you're training a lot, if you're already training a lot in the anaerobic system, and then you're adding more and more high intensity training on top of that, you're going to have a really, really hard time recovering from just the lifting if you're doing that. So again, we have limited resources available when we're in a deficit, and if we're not paying attention to that, it's going to backfire. Trust me, please. I did this for so many years and I was not getting results. I was putting in so much work and doing so much work and not getting I was getting a little result out of it, right? But not getting what I could have got if I just paid more attention to actually doing a little bit less. And so that's something that you've probably heard me talk about a lot on the podcast already, and something I talk about with all my clients and my members and my membership program. But, we have to think about not just doing more and constantly trying to do more. It's like, all right, how can we get better at what we're already doing? How can we focus on the quality over the quantity? And how can we be okay with not running ourselves into the ground? Because I promise you, when you start to be okay with not doing that, the results are going to come, and you're going to be doing a lot of smart work and hard work, but not so much kind of junk work, I guess you could say, or you probably heard the term junk volume that kind of goes hand in hand with it. So like I said before, you also, you might feel good in the moment. Like you might be releasing endorphins, sweating, all that stuff, like within that moment that you're doing those 100 burpees or doing that WOD or whatever it is. But as we know, too much of a good thing can definitely be a bad thing, especially in this context. And I suffered from this for years, like I mentioned. I've worked with tons of clients who have finally been able to realize this through a period of time of actually doing a lot less and seeing the results from that and buying into that process. But you have to think of the long term, right? So, like I said, HIIT training is not bad, but we have to implement it strategically. We have to think about what our primary goals are. We have to figure out how we can support those primary goals over the long term, or support those goals over the long term, and think about working smarter and harder versus doing so much, or actually think about working smarter versus working harder. Not that you don't have to work hard, you definitely have to work hard, but if you can do that in a way that is strategic and smart, you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck, right? We also have to think about when we're comparing HIIT style training or high intensity interval training to LISS style cardio or low intensity steady state. Yes, LISS may take more time and it may be a little bit more time consuming, but it does have a ton of other benefits that directly and also indirectly improve your ability to recover overall from, your lifting sessions, from your ability to actually lose more body fat overall, get stronger over time. All of these things play into it. And LISS cardio actually has a ton of benefits when it comes to improved recovery ability. So again, compared to HIIT style training, that puts you more in that sympathetic state, right? That flight or flight state. LISS style training or aerobic training can actually get you into that parasympathetic state, or that rest and digest mode, rest or de-stress mode, which is super beneficial for all things related to recovery, related to actually losing body fat, being more in that parasympathetic rest mode where your body's not super stressed out, that's going to be much more conducive to being in a place where your body's going to be able to lose body fat a lot more efficiently, right? You're not continuously stressing it out. You're already stressed out because you're in the deficit. Why don't we not stress you out more and be strategic about what we're doing, right? And also something that we don't think about too with list style training or aerobic training is that you're improving your aerobic base, what we call it, and the capacity for your body to utilize oxygen more efficiently and effectively. And so this is actually going to translate to better recovery within your anaerobic training or within, your lifting sessions, your recovery between sets, between reps, and between your training sessions throughout the week, so that you'll be able to go into those sessions feeling a lot more, ready to go, refreshed. You won't be feeling like you're going to fall over on the floor after a few sets of squats. So building that aerobic base is also important just overall for recovery and performance. So again, it's going to lead to better fatigue management and just better able to, deal with the stressors that are going on, not just from your training, but overall life, right? So a few benefits of list cardio, just to kind of list them out here. Better overall blood flow, improving insulin sensitivity. That's something a lot of people don't think about as well. Building your capacity to handle oxidative stress. It can help strengthen your immune system. And again, improve your aerobic base, which is key for, building a foundation of strength and continuing to increase your performance overall. So lastly with this, when we're talking about programming cardio for fat loss specifically, I kind of talked about this in the last question. Aerobic work or list style cardio makes more sense to me, at least, because it's going to improve your body's ability to manage stress and recover better, like I mentioned, especially in a time when you have those limited recovery resources available and you're already in a stressed out state from that deficit. So I know I repeated myself probably 5 times in the last 10 minutes, but it's important to realize that you're already putting yourself in a stressful state being in a deficit. So we have to do things that can manage all of the other stressors that are coming in, right? So if you're doing too many intense cardio sessions, it's going to create more and more stress that's going to spiral into burnout, lack of recovery, and probably cause you to throw your hands up and not adhere to the diet in a lot quicker than you would if you were managing that stress, you were managing your recovery overall, and you'd have much more success in the long term. So this is, again, my experience for myself and most all of the clients that I've worked with. So we have to pay attention to stress. We have to pay attention to what stressors are coming in and how we can manage those as best as possible. So I do want to just hit on a few more recommendations for kind of how I set up cardio for myself and for my clients. Well, I have my own coach that sets up my training plan, or not my training plan actually right now, because I'm experimenting with things on my own right now. But in terms of my nutrition and my cardio, I do have a coach who does that for me, because I always say this: coaches need their own coaches. I always will have my own coach because I need that accountability. I need that outside perspective, that outside eyes looking in. And when I don't have a coach, I definitely know, because I am less successful in whatever I'm doing, and I don't have that accountability side of things. So side note, little plug, if you're interested in coaching, if you're interested in coaching with me, I do offer one-on-one coaching. You can go to my website and you can apply at metflexlife.com/apply for one-on-one coaching. And then I have a small group coaching membership right now called the Flex Fam. It is not open right now for enrollment, but it will be open in the near future. So if you're interested in small group coaching and to do this alongside other women, if you're a female, it's just for females only. Sorry, guys. You can go to theflexfam.com and you can get on the email list for when I'm going to be opening up that in the future. Okay, to quickly go over how I typically program cardio for my clients when the goal is to specifically help them to increase their energy expenditure or to aid in their fat loss goals. So we should be getting the majority of our deficit from our diet, right? That's the thing that we can control most. So the majority of your deficit in a fat loss phase should be coming from your diet or your intake. But we can supplement your diet. We can supplement that deficit with some cardio to help you to quote unquote burn more energy, more calories throughout the day. Again, we have to be strategic with this because your body can adapt very quickly to it. And very quickly is relative, right? but we want to be strategic, right? So the first place that I typically start is just looking at their overall step goal. So if they're looking to increase overall movement throughout the day, if they're looking to increase calorie burn throughout the day or get a little bit more energy expenditure throughout the day, all right, let's first look at where your steps are. And then maybe we can implement, a brisk walk outside to increase those steps, right? And that in itself is a form of low intensity steady state. Especially if it's a brisk walk, right? Or if you're implementing like an incline walk on the treadmill, or you're doing some easy cycling or swimming or biking. Those are all forms of LISS. Obviously, you can turn those into HIIT if you want, especially on the bike, right? You can be doing sprints on the bike or the assault bike, for example. But this is, we're talking about LISS here. We're talking about low intensity steady state. You're able to really, I kind of look at this as you are kind of feeling like you're breathing a little bit harder versus just walking on like a flat surface, but you're still able to hold a conversation, right? So maybe you're sweating a little bit, but you're not all out like huffing and puffing like I feel like I am right now because I'm talking really fast. But you're not, all out huffing and puffing, and you're able to sustain it, right? So like a 20 to 30 minute walk, maybe an incline walk on the treadmill, 20 to 30 minutes, you're able to hold a conversation if you needed to. That would be low intensity steady state. And then from there, if that's something that you're doing and you don't want to implement any more of that. So maybe you're doing 2 LISS sessions a week and you're sleeping well, you're recovering well. Maybe you're not in too much of an aggressive deficit. You're more in a moderate deficit, and everything else is kind of good. Like everything else is balanced out. You're not having any crazy appetite issues or cravings or anything like that. Well, obviously the cravings and appetite can come from a different issue if we're not paying attention to everything. But just overall, like if things are going well, right, especially if I'm working with a client and I'm looking at all the biofeedback metrics that we track, so their sleep, quality, quantity, their cravings throughout the day, their hunger throughout the day, their recovery ability, their motivation to train, like all of these metrics we track on a daily basis because that allows me to see where they're at, right? So if we are currently implementing 2 LISS sessions and they're doing good across the board and they want to implement, they want to bump things up a notch, we can implement like a moderate intensity session or even a high intensity interval session within their training. But typically that comes after we pay attention to their steps and LISS first, right? This is not always the approach I take, and it's going to differ from client to client, from person to person. But typically the approach I take is starting with steps, then potentially implementing some other structured LISS sessions. That's a hard 2 words to say, back to back. So starting with steps, then looking to incorporate another 1 or 2 sessions, on days that they're not training or after their lifting session. And then moving to potentially implementing a HIIT style session or a moderate intensity session. And again, this is going to come from for a client who is, who I'm training, right? So I'm doing their programming, or I know what programming they're doing, and we're looking to just use that cardio as a tool to help with the energy expenditure, to help within that dieting phase. So I'm out of breath. I feel like I'm doing high intensity interval training right now after recording this podcast. But hopefully that made sense. With cardio, again, realizing that it is a tool that needs to be used strategically, especially when we're talking about HIIT or high intensity training, especially when we're talking about using it in the context of fat loss. So you just need to be smart about it. Not saying that you can never do, high intensity training, or that you can never do Orange Theory or CrossFit when you're in a deficit. You absolutely can, especially if that's the training that you enjoy and that you can adhere to week after week. But you have to be smart about it. You can't do what I did and go in a aggressive deficit and train 6 days a week at CrossFit. It's going to be a recipe for disaster, I promise, especially with females, especially from my experience. We have a little bit more sensitive hormones than males do, right? That's just overall across the board. We need to make sure we're paying attention to that. And that's going to come with overtraining as well. Like if you're overtraining, if you're constantly stressing your body, there's going to be repercussions to that. So anyway, I think hopefully that answered your question and gave you kind of my opinion and my background for why I feel like steady state is probably a better option for most people when it comes to fat loss as the goal, or using it as a goal to supplement your deficit in a fat loss phase. All right, last question. This one should be a little bit shorter than the previous two, at least the answer should be a little bit shorter. So the question is, should I cut back on my veggies as I'm finally tracking macros and I'm going over? Okay, so first of all, you don't necessarily need to cut back. You just might need to start planning your meals a little bit better. Because especially, if you're, for example, in a fat loss phase, like we were just talking about the past two questions, veggies can be very beneficial, right? Even if I'm not in fat loss phase, I have veggies in every single meal for me because I'm a volume eater. I like to eat a lot. And so veggies help keep me full on relatively, in terms of the calories in the vegetables, especially the non-starchy veggies, they are lower in calories. You can get a lot of volume for that. And so like I said, I'm a volume eater. I love eating. And so adding veggies to my meals helps keep me full longer, helps satisfy me, helps me feel like I'm eating a lot, right? Or a lot more than if I didn't have veggies, I guess you could say. And obviously there's a whole other route we can go down with this in terms of carnivore and things like that, but I'm not gonna go down that route today. But overall, I would say you don't necessarily need to cut back. I would say just start to plan more in advance, right? So go into your tracking app for the next day. And this is what I recommend to my clients all the time, because if you are not planning your day ahead of time, you're absolutely not going to hit the macros that you're looking to hit if that's your goal, right? Or the calories that you're looking to hit, or your protein goal that you're looking to hit. If you don't plan that in advance, if you don't have some type of strategy going into your day for your meals, and you're just kind of going along and adding things in as the day goes on, like there's 100% chance that you're not going to hit your goals by the end of the day. You have to go in with a plan. And I'm not saying you have to be like 100% on point and have every little like gram planned out, but you have to have some plan going into the day if you want to not get to the end of the day and play macro Tetris, which is what I call it when you're trying to fit certain foods in to hit your macros at the end of the day. So you need to go in and plan in advance, and it's as easy as like planning out one day in advance for the week and then using that day as your base day. So like for me, I go in on Sundays or Saturdays when I'm planning my meals for the week. I'll go in and I'll just plan out my Monday, and then when I go shopping on Sunday, I'll know obviously what I need to get to make those meals, and then I'll basically put Monday on repeat and maybe make some slight adjustments throughout the week depending on what I'm feeling like. So I have kind of my base meat, veggies, fat sources, things like that. And then maybe I want to swap out a meat or swap out a veggie. That's totally okay. Like, it's not like you have to follow exactly every single day. It will be easier if you can follow it, if you can follow the plan exactly, because then you don't have to think about anything, right? It's just one less thing that you have to think about throughout the day. But it all comes back to just at least having some type of plan going into the day so that you know what your meals are looking like. You know that you are going to hit your calorie goal, that you're going to hit your protein goal, which are the most important things when it comes to, especially if you're in a deficit, if you're trying to lose body fat or whatever that may be, protein and calories are going to be the 90% of where it's at, right? So anyway, getting back to the question, you said, should I cut back on veggies? First of all, it also depends on the type of veggie. So like, are we talking non-starchy veggies versus starchy veggies? So things like obviously cauliflower and broccoli and spinach, those are going to be non-starchy, versus like potatoes are going to be a little bit more starchy, or like more starchier squash and things like that. So that's going to also depend, because with the non-starchy veggies, those are the things like the lettuce and the spinach. Those probably aren't the things that are making or breaking your results. And we got to be completely honest here. So if you're having an extra cup of lettuce or an extra handful of broccoli in your meal, I promise you that that's not making or breaking your results. I still recommend tracking them and being as accurate as possible when you're tracking those, just so that you don't, you eliminate any gray areas and you're just aware, right? You're more aware and accurate with your tracking, which is going to make adjusting things down the line a lot easier. But that extra handful of lettuce or that extra few slices of cucumber or broccoli or whatever, that's typically not going to be what's holding you back from achieving your results. We have to think about this from a practical standpoint, right? Those things are very, very low calorie, lots of fiber. And so I wouldn't be worrying about that. What I would be paying attention more to is what you're consuming throughout the rest of the day, right? Or maybe you're adding a little bit of extra oil when you're cooking those veggies, or you're not tracking like the ranch dressing that you're dipping those veggies in, or you're dipping those cucumbers in, right? Those are the things that are going to add up much faster. The oil, the dressings, those types of the condiments, the ketchup, those types of things are going to add up a lot quicker because they have a little bit more calories, less fiber, things like that. But it's probably not the few extra calories that are coming from those non-starchy veggies that are holding you back from getting your results. Again, not saying that you can or you should go out and eat like 10 cups of broccoli or, have 20 extra cups of lettuce in your day and not track them. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that those few extra starchy veggies are probably not what's making or breaking things, right? So pay attention to them, track them so that you can be as accurate as possible, but don't get too caught up on a little bit of extra calories coming from some non-starchy veggies versus the starchy things like the potatoes, having an extra few ounces of potatoes, every single day and not tracking them, like that's going to add up. Having an extra bite of the mashed potatoes with the butter and the cream, that's going to add up. If you have a few extra bites of that every single day, or, you're eating some of your kids' mashed potatoes, or you're taking a bite of your kids' grilled cheese, or you're not measuring out your peanut butter, or like I said, you're just pouring a ton of oil on your veggies and not accounting for that. Those are the things that are going to add up. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight into that. But yeah, I would say you don't necessarily need to cut back on the veggies, just plan your meals a little bit more, be more aware of all the other things that are going on within your day and all the other foods that you're eating that might be adding up a little bit more quicker than you think. All right, that's all the questions we have for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did enjoy it and you haven't left a review on iTunes for the show, that would be super awesome. If you could head over to iTunes, search MetFlex and Chill, and just give us hopefully a 5-star rating and a few sentences in the review just saying what you liked about the podcast, anything that you learned. That helps to grow the show. And if you don't listen to this on iTunes, you don't have an account, you can always go to YouTube and hit the subscribe button. That also helps to grow the show. And if you're on Spotify, I don't really know what the deal is with Spotify. I think you can maybe give it a rating or give it a follow. Yeah, I'm not sure about Spotify, but either way, any of that helps. All of that helps. And also, if you want to check out more resources that I have available, definitely head over to my website, metflexlife.com. Lots of stuff on there. And if you're not signed up for the Friday Flex, definitely sign up for that, metflexlife.com/newsletter. All right, I'll talk to you next time.